When you were 10 years old, a single summer felt endless. 3 months seemed like an entire lifetime. Waiting for your birthday was, unbearable. Christmas felt impossibly far away. Even one school year felt so long it was hard to imagine it ever ending. Now think about last year. Probably feels like it happened only a few months ago. January became June, June became December. Entire years seem to just blur before you even have time to notice them. Most people assume this is just part of getting older. But what if that's not what's happening at all? What if time itself hasn't changed? What if your brain has? Because according to neuroscience, the strange feeling that life speeds up as you age isn't just in your imagination. Your brain is literally measuring time differently than it did when you were a child. Now, once you understand why, you'll never experience another year quite the same way again. Now, let's start with a question. How does your brain actually know how much time has passed? You might think it's like some kind of really good, accurate internal clock constantly checking every second. It doesn't. Your brain almost never measures time directly. Instead, it measures memories. Imagine 2 vacations. First one, almost identical to every vacation you've taken before. Same beach, same hotel, same restaurants. Every day looks almost exactly like the one before it. Now, the second vacation is completely different. You visit a country you've never seen before. You get lost in unfamiliar streets. You try strange food that you kind of regret, but now you know, don't eat that. You hear a language you don't understand, and months later, which vacation feels longer? Almost everybody gives the same answer. It's the second one. Even if both trips lasted exactly 7 days. Why? Because your brain remembers experiences, not seconds. Every new place, every unexpected conversation, every surprise creates a rich memory. And routine doesn't. That's where the mystery begins. Children experience the world almost entirely through novelty. Everything is happening for the first time. Everything. First day of school, first best friend, first bicycle, first time seeing the ocean, first sleepover, first heartbreak. To an adult, these are all just memories. Ordinary memories. Nothing bad about them. They're just memories. To a child's brain, there's new experiences, and novelty is incredibly expensive. When your brain encounters something unfamiliar, it really pays close attention to it. Collects more details, stores more information, builds stronger memories. In other words, it works harder. Scientists have found that new experiences activate brain regions associated with attention and memory much more strongly than familiar ones. So your brain's essentially saying, this is important, save everything. That's why childhood feels so unbelievably rich when you look back on it. It's packed with firsts, and something changes as we grow older. Life becomes predictable. You wake up at roughly the same time, you drive the same roads, you walk to the same office. You see the same faces, you eat similar meals, you scroll through the same apps, and tomorrow looks surprisingly similar to yesterday. And your brain, because it already knows what to expect, it stops paying attention. Think about your drive home from work. Have you ever arrived in your driveway and realized that you barely remember the last 15 minutes? You weren't asleep, you weren't unconscious, you just weren't creating any new memories. Psychologists sometimes call this automatic processing. Once the brain masters a routine, it performs much of it with remarkably little conscious effort. It's incredibly efficient, but there's a cost. When fewer memories are created, your brain has fewer landmarks to measure the passage of time. Looking back, weeks begin to collapse into each other, then months, then entire years. It's like reading a book where every chapter tells the exact same story. Eventually, they all blend together. Here's the strange part. This doesn't change how you remember the past. It changes how you experience the present. Because the faster your brain predicts what's about to happen, the less attention it pays to what's happening now. That may be the real reason, really, why life seems to accelerate. Not because the clock is going tick, 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 moving faster, but because your brain has stopped noticing how much of life has become familiar. Scientists discovered something even more surprising. That feeling that time speeds up can actually be manipulated. In laboratory experiments, researchers found they could make the exact same amount of time feel dramatically shorter, or dramatically longer, without changing the clock at all. Now, this sounds impossible. How can the exact hour feel completely different depending on what's happening? Well, scientists have been trying to answer that question for decades, and one of the most surprising discoveries is that your brain experiences time in 2 completely different ways. The first is called perspective time, and this is how time feels when you're living through it. The second is retrospective time. This is how long that same experience feels when you remember it later. And here's the strange part. The 2 often completely disagree. Imagine you're in a waiting room, you have nothing to do, no phone, no music, just a clock ticking on the wall. 5 minutes feels like 20, and then you check the time again. Only 30 seconds have passed, and you're like, oh no, it feels unbearable. Now imagine spending the evening with your closest friends. You're laughing, talking, telling stories, and before anyone notices, 6 hours have passed. And while you're living those moments, time seems to fly. But a month later, something fascinating happens. When you think back to the waiting room, it feels like almost nothing happened. The memory is empty. There's no conversations, no surprises, no emotional moments, just a blank space. But the evening with your friends feels much longer than it actually was. You remember the jokes, the restaurant, the music in the background, the strange conversation on the way back home, and in reality, both experiences happened on the same clock. But inside your memory, one became compressed and the other expanded. That's because your brain isn't measuring minutes. It's measuring information. The richer an experience is, the more mental snapshots your brain stores. And those snapshots become the landmarks your memory later uses to estimate how much time has passed. Think of it like driving down a highway, for example. If every mile looks exactly the same, the journey is going to feel surprisingly short. But if every few minutes the landscape changes, mountains, forests, lakes, villages, the exact same distance is going to feel much longer. Your memory works the same way. Novel experiences create landmarks. Routine erases them. And this explains something that almost everybody has experienced without ever realizing it. You ever walked through old photos from vacation and thought, I can't believe all this happened in just 1 week? But when you look back at the last month of ordinary work, you have a hard time remembering anything specific at all. It's not because your vacation lasted longer. It's because your brain had much more to remember. And then researchers discovered something even stranger. The feeling that life speeds up doesn't simply begin when you become an adult. It accelerates gradually, because every passing year becomes a smaller percentage of your entire life. When you're 5 years old, 1 year represents 20% of everything you've ever experienced. That's enormous. When you're 50, 1 year is only about 2% of your life. Some psychologists believe this changing perspective may also be why and might also contribute to why each year seems to shrink as we age. Whether that's the complete explanation, still debated, but almost everyone agrees on one thing. Memory plays a far greater role than the clock itself. Which raises an even bigger question. If your brain is responsible for making life feel faster, could you train it to slow life down again? The good news is your brain can't be fooled. Not with tricks, not with hacks, but by giving it exactly what it evolved to pay attention to. Think back to one of the most unforgettable weeks of your life. Maybe it was your first trip abroad, the first day at university, the first week you fell in love, or a simple weekend where everything seemed different. Now ask yourself something. Did that week actually contain more hours than any other week? No, of course not. It has the exact same 168 hours as every other week you've ever lived, and yet somehow it feels much longer. That's because your brain isn't measuring time, it was recording novelty. Neuroscientists have found that novelty increases activity in the hippocampus, one of the brain's most important memory centers. When something is new, unexpected, or emotionally significant, your brain releases more dopamine. And most people think dopamine is just the pleasure chemical. No, it's not. One of its most important jobs is telling your brain, pay attention. This matters. That single signal changes how memories are stored. The stronger the memory, the richer your mental timeline becomes. And the richer your timeline becomes, the longer your life feels when you look back on it. This may explain why childhood seems endless. Children encounter something new almost every day. New words, new games, new fears, new places, new friends. Their brains are constantly building new maps of the world, and adults rarely do this. Without realizing it, many people spend years repeating almost the exact same thing every day. Same alarm, same coffee, same road, same office, same conversations, same television shows. Then they wonder why 5 years disappeared in what feels like a single moment. The clock did not speed up. Routines simply stop leaving enough footprints in memory. Researchers sometimes refer this to as the holiday paradox. When you're on vacation, time often seems to just fly by, and you don't want it to end. But months later, the same vacation feels surprisingly long in your memory because it's filled with unfamiliar experiences. Meanwhile, an ordinary month at home might have felt slow while you were living it, yet almost invisible when you look back. It's one of the strangest illusions your brain creates. A life full of repetition often feels comfortable in the moment, but surprisingly short in hindsight. A life filled with novelty sometimes feels exhausting, but incredibly rich when remembered. So can you actually slow life down? No, not by changing the clock, but perhaps by changing what your brain chooses to remember. Learning a new language, taking a different route home, meeting new people, reaching outside your usual interests, traveling somewhere unfamiliar. Even something as simple as trying a new hobby forces your brain to stop running on autopilot. And suddenly it has to pay attention again. It has to build new memories. It has to notice details it has ignored for years. That's the fascinating part. The secret isn't adding more time to your life. No one can do that. The secret may be convincing your brain that more of your life is worth remembering. Because in the end, we don't experience life through clocks, we experience it through memories. 20 years from now, you probably won't remember the 100th ordinary Tuesday you spent doing exactly what you always do. But you'll remember the unexpected conversation that changed your perspective, the book that you decided to read that you've put off for years, the trip you almost canceled, the moment you took a chance, the day something completely new happened. And maybe that's why childhood felt so long. Not because time moved more slowly, but because your brain was seeing the world for the first time. And perhaps the greatest tragedy of adulthood isn't getting older, it's allowing life to become so familiar that your brain quietly stops paying attention. Because the days you remember become the life you believe you lived.